Hey folks, I'm Chuck Black, and this is a video of me implementing a feature, or at least the start of a feature in quokka-prime. What this is really going to be like, it's not that any of my videos are polished. It's not going to be polished. It's not going to be quick. It is about 45 or 50 minutes of you looking over my shoulder as I implement a feature in the context of quokka-prime that we've been working on. The feature that I'm going to be implementing is snooping. I'm going to be modifying the worker code to do snooping. I'm going to be modifying the REST API code and other business logic to do snooping. I'm going to be writing data to the database to capture snooping information. And I'm going to be doing this and showing you how I would do this in a real world environment. So you're going to see me doing Git and creating a branch called Snoop, and then I'm going to be doing work on Snoop. You're going to be seeing me modifying code. I'll be modifying code in the Quokka server. I will be modifying code in the Quokka worker, which is the worker stuff. This is in the server, the DB APIs for communicating information into the database, the worker APIs for receiving and sending data to the workers, and we will be using our nice Swagger interface to test our functionality to make sure that capturing packets still works, because snooping is similar to capturing packets, and to actually try our new Snoop endpoint. So if you're interested in all of that stuff and listening to me drone on and on about what I'm doing, I will have maybe 4 or 5 hours worth of work condensed into 50 minutes, as I say. And as I'm just going to warn you again, it's not polished. You need to be into this stuff if you really want to watch it. So with those caveats, hopefully you know what you're in for if you continue. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. Yeah, let's get started with the implementation of this new feature that I'm calling Snoop. So this is the beginning of me adding what I'm going to call Snoop functionality to quokka-prime. So as you know, quokka-prime has terminal-based output. I also have the user interface-based output, which allows me to do these actions. So I've implemented time series data for the host. So this type of data, you can see I haven't really had this on. So I don't have a whole lot of data there. Let's see if I can find a better one that has more interesting data. Yeah, here we go. So this, I have time series data. That's something that I've done in the actions. I have extended scan. That's an extended port scan. It's hard to see that. Sorry about it. I haven't figured out how to get my tooltips to be larger. And then this one is packet capture, and this is for hosts. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another action that, at least this is my plan, that will be something like this with a magnifying glass, and it will be called Snoop. And the idea of Snoop is that it will go to this device, or it will go and examine this device. It will do extended port scan. Maybe there's more nmap stuff I can do to get information about it. And it will also do packet capture and then examine the data. So I'm going to write some type of post-processing of packet capture in order to look at vulnerable packets that I see getting passed back and forth. I don't know if I'm going to do actually any analysis in trying to figure out passwords or anything like that, but I am going to do snooping. And as you can see, I'll also print out vulnerabilities in the form of open ports. So that's my general plan. So as we begin, let's look at a picture of this thing, because I think pictures help us to understand exactly what's going on. We're adding this Snoop functionality, so we will need to have some Snoop endpoints for initiating the snooping to go on. That's the thing that's going to initiate this message, etc. There's going to be something to get Snoop information from the database, so there will be endpoints for that as well. We will be having a Snoop table. This is where we're going to keep various information. I'm not sure everything right now, but I know at least packet captures that we will be storing there for deep dive analysis. So we're going to do kind of data mining of the packet captures in there. So that's why we're going to have a separate table for that, even though they may be just the same as packet captures. And we're going to have a worker which is going to do our snooping for us. Now the worker that does snooping is going to be pretty much the same as packet capture, but I may add more information or more functionality to it, and therefore I'm going to do it as a separate entity and not just like a subset of capture. So that's what we're going to be working on here. This is the visual image of what's going on with this feature. Now the first thing that I'm going to do, because I'm not even sure that this is going to work, is I am going to do all of my feature addition on a separate branch. So I've checked everything in, and now I do a git checkout. -b says create me a branch please, and I'm calling this branch Snoop. And you can see git returned with, now I'm on branch Snoop. When I do a git status, it tells me that I'm on branch Snoop, so that's good to know. It is telling me that I have untracked files, so I went and I edited git ignore, and down here at the bottom of all this, I committed my git ignore changes. I've modified my git ignore so that it will ignore those files, and now I do a git commit that I've updated git ignore, and then yeah, so that's where I am right now. Git status, I haven't checked in those changes yet. I'm on branch Snoop and there's nothing to commit. So now I can begin to do some code development. Now, as you may or may not have noticed, I have removed all of my quokka-prime that's been running. I had the monitors running, I had the server running, and I had a bunch of the terminal window displays running, and I had the user interface running. And normally I just like to do that because it's fun to have it poking around in the background, but I wanted to make sure as I develop code here that I'm not taxing my memory too much. Here you can see I'm using only 2.4 gig of 5.8. This is a concern because you can see here, this is actually my Windows 10. My host is Windows 10. This thing that you're looking at here and that you see all the time is just a virtual machine that I'm running inside VirtualBox. And you can see I'm at 11.5 gig of 16 gig. I've gotten rid of my Chrome that's running with many tabs, so that frees up a bunch of memory. And yeah, so I just want to be able to mind my own business and not have too much stuff going on while I'm doing this new development task. Now this Snoop functionality that I'm going to add is going to mainly have stuff in common with packet capture. And so what I'm going to do, you can see here I am in the Quokka server. This is the Flask application that is running. These are my endpoints, and I have a class called capture endpoint for which I've implemented Git and I've implemented post. Now if you haven't experienced these, you need to look at my 52 weeks of Python. I have lessons. These are the long form lessons that are on the implementation of the Flask server and doing packet capture. If you look through the stuff that I've got out there, you can understand that. If you are new and you don't really understand this, then probably you're going to have to just hang on for dear life. You may absorb some of this. You may find it to be too much. There's a whole lot going on. We've got Swagger for documentation. I've got implementation of REST APIs, etc., getting of arguments, etc. This is all new to you if you are new at this point in time, so don't worry about that, and you can hang on as long as you want. For those of you that kind of know what's going on and you're interested in seeing how I implement a feature in the existing quokka-prime, this is what I'm going to do now. So as I mentioned, this Snoop functionality is similar to capture, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually copy all of my capture functionality that I've already implemented. So let me go down here. This gets me all the way down to all of my capture functionality. I'm going to do a Control-C, and now I'm going to paste it right here. So now I have defined this. I have the capture endpoint, but you actually see I have capture endpoint defined twice, so this is wrong. And PyCharm hasn't figured that out yet, and I'm not sure exactly why, but be that as it may, it hasn't figured it out yet. Now, one thing that's important, if you've been listening to what I talk about in my How Not to Be a Good Programmer, I say don't copy and paste your own code. And so you're saying to yourself, hang on a minute, didn't you just copy and paste your own code? If you did listen to my entire little blurb on not copying and pasting your own code, then you hopefully will have listened to the part where I say there will be cases where you copy and paste in order to get some basic functionality down and then to modify it into something different. And that is what I've done here. I'm going to come through. Here's my capture stuff. I'm not going to modify that. Here is the new stuff that I've added, and I'm going to change this into being Snoop functionality. Now let me just show you quickly how I would make these changes. So here is my worker capture endpoint. Here is my capture endpoint that's going to be coming in from the user interface. And so those are not going to be changed. I'm going to put my cursor right here, and now I'm going to say Control R. And Control R is going to allow me to change one thing into something else. And so what I want to change is I'm going to first change capture into Snoop. And I'm not going to say replace all. I'm going to go through and do it one at a time. So here's my class capture endpoint. I'm going to replace that. Here is just some text that I'm printing out. I'll go ahead and replace that. Here's some more text that I print out. I'm going to change that. And here is my worker capture that's going to become worker Snoop. Now, you'll notice I'm not modifying the one that is not capitalized. I'm going to go back and do that. You see I'm at the end of my file here. So now I've made that change. I'm going to go back up here to where I began. Here's my capture endpoint. And you can see I've changed that to Snoop. Now what I want to do is I want to go through and change small c capture to small s Snoop. So I'm not sure if this is doing it correctly for me. So here's my Snoop endpoint, and this is my capture endpoint. So I think I'm pretty good here. If I start right here and I say find me the next one, you can see there's a lot of captures in here. So I'm going to say replace. So that will replace my endpoint. And now I have a bunch of these little bits where I have capture. So I'm going to go ahead and let it change all of these. I'm still in doing my capture time. A lot of clicking as I go through here. This is here again, I'm at Snoop, so I want to make this change. So I want to do replace. I'm almost done. Replace. So now I'm done with all of this. You'll notice that I do have a bunch of errors. There's a function that I have called record Snoop data. I haven't created a new function for that. I have capture data, but I'm not going to use that. So anyway, this is the bare bones of what I'm going to be doing for Snoop. Now, when I do Snoop, I'm going to be changing all of this functionality, but I didn't want to have to type it all in, and that's why I did the copy and paste. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is get rid of a bunch of this Git code. Git is what is going to retrieve packets in the packet capture sense. That's what it does. Here, let me get rid of this so that's not confusing. That's what Git does. It retrieves the packets, but we're not going to be doing that with our Snoop because we're going to do something more and better with that packet capture data. So I don't really need any of this. So I am going to actually just, why don't I get rid of it? So I'm just going to delete all that. And this is not going to work out well if I try to return all this stuff. So I'm going to return that. Now, I don't know what this is going to be for my Swagger stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just comment that out right now. So now I'm down to 2 errors, and my Git doesn't really do anything. And my errors are down here. This is where I do my Start Snoop in order to get things going. And yeah, my worker Snoop, and this is where I record Snoop data. So I'm going to need to modify these, or I'm going to need to create the functionality to do this. And so let's take a look inside Start Capture, which is right there, and then we'll see what we need to do in there. So when we're doing packet capture, when we get a post, then we come down and we eventually say Start Capture. In the Snoop situation, when we get a post, we will be doing Start Snoop. Now I don't have Start Snoop yet, but it's going to be much like Start Capture, so I'm going to use that as the basis. So I'm going to my worker APIs where I have Start Capture. I've gone through this code before in other situations where I describe how I implemented worker APIs and stuff, so I'm not going to go over the details of this, but suffice to say that I will be doing Start Snoop that will look similar to this. So let's copy this so I don't have to do all the details, and then let's modify it so that it is Start Snoop. So here we say Start Snoop. I'm going to be passing in the same information. I'm just going to copy this and then change capture to Snoop. My work type needs to be Snoop, so I want to make sure that I do that correctly. I guess I might as well change this. Let's see, capture time. This is going to be Snoop time. So let's change this right here. And I'm going to change this right there. All right, so now I've got Snoop time, and I'm going to say Snoop. Actually, I probably should have done this with Control R, huh? Change that, change this to be Snoop info, and here I'm going to be passing in Snoop info JSON. Oh, here I need to change capture info to Snoop info. Let's see, that should have cleared that up. Let's go back here to where I call Start Snoop and make sure that, yeah, I've got Snoop time set correctly. I did that. So it doesn't know about Start Snoop, it does know about Start Capture. So let's see where we have Start Capture. Control F, Start Capture. There's Start Capture, so I need to add Start Snoop to this. Okay, let's get rid of that. Start Capture, Start Snoop. Let's go down to where we were. And now you see Start Snoop is looking okay, so that's good. The next thing we'll look at is when we get Snoop packet captures back, we're going to need to record that data. Okay, we're making progress as we start to implement this Snoop functionality. You see I've got my Snoop endpoint. We just talked about handling the post, which is where somebody comes in and says, I want you to snoop on this host or device or whatever it might be. What we haven't done, you can see there's an error still. We just did Start Snoop, but what we haven't done is when we receive data from the worker, this data is going to be in the form of packet captures. When we receive that, we want to store that. And so if we look up here to packet capture, you can see this is where we did record capture data, and we want to do record Snoop data because we're going to store it in a different place and we're going to do different stuff with it. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to record capture data, and we are going to base our record Snoop data off of what we've done here. Now, as you can see, for my captured packets, I do a whole lot of massaging of the data to make it look nice for our packet capture display. I'm not going to care about any of that in my snooping, but what I will do is, since I'm going to use this as my basis, I'm going to copy all of this stuff and do a Control-C, and I think I will I'll put it right next to it here. So why don't I do that? I'm going to paste that in. Now I should have record capture data. That should be there twice. I'm not sure why PyCharm is not highlighting the fact that I've defined that function twice, but I don't want it. Oh, there. See how it's highlighted in this sort of brownish, beigeish background color? That's telling me, in fact, this is probably what it is, redeclared record packet capture defined above without usage. So that's good. That's working correctly. Now what I want to call this is record Snoop data. So let's do that. Let's also, we could call it whatever we want in here, but let's call the data on this side Snoop data. Sounds like Snoop Dogg. I just saw him talking about the Olympics here in the US. Anyway, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do something with these packets, but I'm not sure what yet. So let's leave that. Let's just get rid of all of this extra massaging that I do down here for the extra stuff. So I'm going to hit backspace. And now if I look, here's my record Snoop data. I need to be calling this stuff Snoop data in here. Remember, I called it capture data before, so I'm going to I'm going to double click on that, and I'm going to print that out. There we go. So it's gotten rid of those as bugs. It doesn't like that I have too many blank lines, so being obsessive about this stuff, I'm getting rid of it. So now we have record Snoop data. So right now, if I were to look at this, you see I have my Snoop endpoint, and my Snoop endpoint handles, doesn't really do anything with a get, but it handles a post. That's where somebody says, I want you to snoop. And when we do that, we're going to start our Snoop, which is going to send a message to a worker which we haven't implemented yet. And then down here, receiving this worker Snoop request, that's when data is coming in from the worker, and it is going to say, hey, I have this data. What we're going to do is we're going to get the JSON. We're going to record Snoop data. You notice there's still a bug here it's highlighting for us. The reason it's highlighting that is we haven't declared it. So we need to come up here, and somewhere I will have said record capture data, comma, here I want to record, and this is probably smart enough. See how PyCharm is smart enough to know that I have something called record Snoop data. See, it knows that I've already on this import statement put record port scan, trace route, and capture data. So I can just hit tab, and it's going to put that in there. And sure enough, we're looking okay. And whoops, I forgot something, one more thing that you probably noticed, and that is this. When I record my Snoop data, where do I want to store it? Well, I want to store it in the Snoop table. Unfortunately, I didn't make that change, so let's change this to be Snoops. And I think because of the way that Mongo works, I'm trying to remind myself this is all I will need to do in order for PyMongo, to create the table and to insert a packet into it. We'll find that later on as we begin to get to the point where we can test it. So now's a good point to remind ourselves what we've done. So as you know, we're trying to add this snooping functionality to the product. I'm representing this stuff, mainly the code that we've worked on is within Quokka server and the APIs for worker and database, but I've implemented most of that or much of that. I have not implemented this worker yet, so I need to create a Snoop worker, which is going to basically be the same as the capture worker, but it's going to be sending the data to a different endpoint. I've toyed with different ways to do this. I think I'm just going to create a completely new thing called Snoop, because we may want to be adding more functionality to that later on that's not just capture. And of course the Snoops database table. Now we have code that is allegedly writing to that. We will have to test that out. But in order to get this to be the point where we can test it, we need to have a worker that is going to respond to things. So that's what we're going to look at next. So what I'm going to do now is work on the worker. That would be the piece that actually does the snooping of traffic. And so when a request comes in that says, I want you to snoop on this device or host or whatever, we're going to send a message that's going to go through our RabbitMQ message broker. We don't implement this. And then it's going to be received by the Quokka worker. So let's remind ourselves what data is going into it. So here's where I call Start Snoop. Remember, that was from the Quokka server where I'm down here and somebody does a post to get snooping started, and we call Start Snoop. And so what we're going to do in Start Snoop is we're going to create this Snoop information dictionary. It's going to have Quokka so that it knows where to send the packet back to, so the worker knows how to send that back. What I'm saying is this right here, where we're sending the packet back to the Quokka server once we've done the capture or whatever. So that is one piece of data. The work type Snoop, that's going to be important. That's where we're going to have to, we're going to trigger off of that in order to create my snooping thread. And then here's the information that I'm passing in. And then send worker request. This is the same thing that I do for all of the other requests that I send. So now let's look at the Quokka worker. Remember, this is the piece of code that is running, that receives packets from RabbitMQ. Pika is the name of the Python package that implements it. And I'm going to jump right to the point here where we receive the request, and we're going to get this work info that in our case is going to be the Snoop information. But and here I can see if work info work type is not in one of these three, then I'm going to say, up, that's bad. So what I need to do clearly is I need to add my Snoop into this. So let me find where this is actually defined. So trace route is right here, so I'm going to add this right now. So now I've created this variable called Snoop. Let me make sure that that's what I am passing in my worker APIs. Yes, Snoop is what the work type is. So that looks like it's the right thing. Let's come back down here and add it to my list of different work types that we're looking for. So we're going to make sure that it's in there. So that's good. And then we're going to say process work request. Process work request is just going to make sure that I have Quokka in the work info so that I know where to send it. And then depending on the type of work that was requested, we're going to create a work thread. And so you can see I have capture thread. If it's capture, port scan, trace route, etc. As you can imagine, what I'll be doing here is I will be adding if work type equals Snoop. And if it is equal to Snoop, then I'm going to say work thread equals, and now I need to put the name of my Snoop thread class, which I haven't created yet. Oops. So I'm just going to do this Snoop thread, same as I did before, and pass in Quokka and work info. That'll pass in my Snoop information. Now the next thing I'm going to have to do is create this Snoop thread. So I've had a bit of a think about how I want to do this in terms of creating my own class called Snoop thread rather than just trying to reuse the capture thread. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to reuse the capture thread. So I'm going to change this to be capture thread. And what I'm going to do in capture thread is I'm going to add an extra parameter, which is called Snoop, and I'm going to set it equal to true. So what this will do is it will send the parameter Snoop equals true when I do my initialization of capture thread. Now if I look at this, it's probably going to tell me that it's an unexpected argument because capture thread, the initialization, doesn't actually have that yet. So I'm going to go to my capture thread and I'm going to add this extra parameter, which is going to be called Snoop, and I'm going to set it by default equals false. So remember the difference here when I set this as a default value when I am doing the definition of the method. I set this right here. That's my Snoop equals false. I don't actually use it yet. I'll do that in a minute. In Quokka Worker, you can see that I have set up and it just went away. Here's where I'm saying this is a keyword parameter. So I'm passing in the keyword when I'm calling it, when I'm creating this object for the initialization, I'm setting that to true. Up here, capture thread itself, I'm not even going to bother to put that parameter there. Why not? Just because I want you to understand that by default, I am going to have the default value of Snoop be false. And all I'm going to do in here is I'm going to set Snoop self.snoop equals my value for Snoop. And so what will end up happening is I can then, when I'm calling to process the packet and to send this capture, what I'm going to pass in, I'm going to create an extra parameter here, or add an extra parameter, and that is going to be sending in self.snoop. So this value will be getting sent in, and I will end up passing this value in so that when I do a send capture, it will know whether to send it. If I go down into send capture, I'm going to go down right here. Here it's saying, wait a minute, that's an unexpected argument. Remember that from before? That's why it's highlighting that for me. Let's go down there and let's add this thing right here. Let's add Snoop, and I'm going to give it a default value once again, even though I'm calling it and I'm going to be passing it in. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to set this value. Here is the thing that I'm going to change. In fact, what I will do is I will set a variable, and I will say if not Snoop endpoint equals worker capture, else endpoint, see if I can spell it correctly, equals Snoop capture. And now I'm going to change this to just be endpoint. And now I think that all of these should be happy. Self.snoop, see that just went away, so that should be okay. And this should allow me to reuse my capture thread now. It's a little bit confusing. I have to deal with the fact that I'm calling it capture thread, but I'm actually using it both for the purpose of doing regular packet capture as well as for doing snooping. But I am getting to reuse all of that code. It's not a ton of code. As you can see, it's what, 80 lines of code, but 80 lines of code that I don't have to do over and over again is 80 lines that I don't have to maintain and update if I need to do that. So, so this looks okay. I have something old here. Let me just get rid of this. So at this point, I've made a lot of changes here. You can see I've just done a git status, and it's showing me that I've modified all of this stuff. And so in general, I don't tend to trust my laptops, and I would prefer my code to be, that I've worked on for a while, to be stored safely up in the cloud. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a git commit first. I need to give a comment here, initial steps for adding Snoop. And now I'm going to do a git push origin main in order to push it up. Whoops. And I did that wrong because where am I? You notice I've already forgotten that I'm on branch Snoop. So that was dumb of me. I need to do a git push origin Snoop. That's the name of my branch. And you can see it has added stuff to Snoop. Snoop now has all of my new code up there. It's up in the cloud. I could develop on a different system if I wanted to. If my system crashes, I have it backed up, so that's all good. I have it stored away safely. Now, I had a couple issues where I was referring to Snoop data here under API models. This is what I use for doing Swagger stuff. Swagger is the tool that we use to test typically our REST APIs, and you can look at the lesson that I taught on that. I changed. I used to have something called Snoop data. I don't really know what I'm going to do with this, so I just set it to capture data for now because I'm not really using it. I had to do that there and here as well. Now I've got everything running. Just so you know, I'm in quokka-prime server and I've run the service and it's running. I went to monitor and it's monitoring as well. I started the user interface going. It took a while, but it's up and going. And now I have my workers going. So here's my worker that is waiting and listening for messages. This is what I made changes to. Well, I made changes to other stuff as well. But what I want to do is I want to test to see if I can get packets. You can see I've already done this just a little while ago. But basically what I did was I went to hosts here, and this is actually up. It's just not responding to requests. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to capture packets, and here is my 192.168.254.10. You can see that I did this. What's my time? 12:07. If you look up here, it's 14:07. I'm going to say start capture, and when I do that, you can see down here that it received my capture request. And I'm going to go over here and I'll pull up my browser. That should get some stuff going. But actually, this monitoring is happening locally on my VM. So I'm not actually going to be able to see that because I'm bridged. So let me go here and let me do something like go to news.google.com. You can already see that some stuff is going on there. So I'm beginning to capture packets. That's good. If I go back here to Quokka, if this is updated, then we should have some packets. Let me see if this will straighten out. 12:07, it's going to refresh. I should have some packets. And this should say, whatever this is, to whatever. It's going and getting the packets now. 14:10, yeah. So basically, I've received packets. You could also see this here. So capturing packets is okay. Now the next thing, now that I've confirmed that that part is working, that I didn't break existing stuff, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and I'm going to use Swagger in order to test the new code that I've written for snooping. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to run Swagger, which is like a user interface, but I'm going to be making REST calls directly. You should look up the lesson where I talked about adding Swagger if you're unfamiliar with it. Basically, I'm going to be making my REST calls, and that will cause me to attempt to do snooping type of packet capture. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to say localhost :5001. That is going to go to the Quokka Swagger interface. And so here it is. I'm clicking on it. And as I scroll down here, these are all my RESTful APIs that I've implemented in quokka-prime. And guess what? My Snoop showed up. So I've implemented Snoop as we saw. And post is the thing that I will be attempting to do in order to communicate with the worker out there. So what I need to do here is say try it out. That allows me to type in something here. I can give IP address protocol port Snoop time. Those are the parameters that I've configured that we can do. 192.168.254.10 is the one that we were looking at, and now I'm going to do execute. And what we should see is something happening over here. And you can see this is my completed capture, and down here, capture thread, I have an error. So basically, my quokka worker received a request, and the problem is that this capture info, it didn't have a field in here called capture time. When you see a key error, that means that it's going to be something in a dictionary probably. Here is my problem. I don't have a field called capture time. Now if I go back to my code, let's find the code where I set this up. That would be, whoops, go away. That would be in my Quokka server. When I get a request, I would come down here. Let's see, is this that's host status, service status. I am down below where I want to be. So here is my Snoop code, and this is my post for Snoop. And the thing that I do is I say Start Snoop. If I Control B to go down into this, you can see that I'm setting a bunch of these things. But remember, I decided to change this to Snoop time because at the time that I did it, I thought that I was going to be creating my own class that would be a thread that would do the packet captures. I'm deciding to use capture, the capture thread, and so it is expecting there to be a field called capture time. So what I'm going to do, this is in the Quokka server. So what I'm going to do is come back here and I'm going to find my Quokka server. I'm going to do Control C twice. That causes me to shut down the thread, the hourly task thread, and to shut down hopefully gracefully. Within 15 seconds it should wake up and it should terminate, and then I should be able to just run this again because this is all in the Quokka server. So I'm going to go ahead and run this. And this is one of the nice things about this design that we're looking at right here. All of these are independent little entities here, and they seem to run, they do run relatively autonomously. So my monitors run autonomously, my workers run autonomously, my UI runs autonomously. I just brought this down and I've made it so that all of these guys, the monitors and the workers and the UI, can tolerate the server going down, and then when it comes back up, they just resume what they were doing. So I should be able to do a Quokka request. So I'm going to see what happens here. Let's go and make sure that I'm looking at my worker. Now my worker crashed. That's not a good thing. I should end gracefully there. That's a bad design by me. So I'm making a point in my mind to say I need to fix that. But for right now, I'm going to go here. Here you can see that we're going to look for a message to come down here, and hopefully it won't crash. Let me try and execute this. So it seems to be happier, and I am capturing packets. Now let me go to the server, and there should be these captures. See this? Snoop/capture, and I'm getting a 404 error. That means that I have not implemented my RESTful API for this appropriately. And at this point, I'm not exactly sure why, so I'm going to go look at the code and figure that out. So here was the error that I printed out. 404 means that there's something wrong with the request. There is no such thing as /snoop/capture. If I look at my code and see what's implemented, I can see my actual URL that I'm looking for is workers/ Snoop. It's supposed to be similar to worker slash capture. And if you look at my worker code in my util function where I'm sending the capture, remember I added this parameter to say whether Snoop was true or false. And here's my error. If the endpoint is not Snoop, then I'm setting it to worker slash capture, which is what it's supposed to be. And otherwise, my endpoint says Snoop slash capture, which it's not supposed to be. It's supposed to be worker slash Snoop, as you recall from the code that we were just looking at. So here's worker Snoop. That is what we are looking for down here, worker slash Snoop. So I fixed that. What I need to do now, once again, I have a problem with just getting, I'm in my workers here. I'm going to hit Control C. That actually brings them down. And now I'm going to run it again. So I'm going to run my worker. My worker is going to be sitting there waiting for messages. I'm going to go back to my request. I'm here on my Swagger page for doing a Snoop request. And I can just hit execute again, and we should see down here that we're going to be, we've received it. We're waiting for messages. And as soon as I've seen a message, I'm going to pop over here to the server, and we will look and see what it says in terms of whether that was successful or not. Now, one thing I can do is I could detach this terminal, and now I can look at both of these at the same time. This terminal here, actually, I need to be down at the bottom so I can see the latest stuff that's coming in. There was my Snoop, my post for snooping. Let me go back to my worker. Up there we go. See, I'm getting these as this is updating here. I can see I'm actually getting data. These posts are getting a 204. Let me see if I can show this to you. I'm getting a 204 back when I'm up. This is my host name. Sorry, that's not what I wanted to show you. I wanted to show you the actual Snoop that was going on. So here's my post of a Snoop, and then here's my post of worker Snoop, and 204 was my return code. So those all got received. So that's good news. That means that my code here for this received the data, and then I went ahead and did record Snoop data, and it didn't crash. And so what I need to do is I need to now go look in the database and see if I actually received that stuff. So let's see where we're at. We've just made this request. Down here, my worker, I've gotten a bunch of captures when I requested a Snoop. When I looked at what was happening, I saw that I was getting the data on my server, and supposedly it's storing it. So what I want to do now is I want to check the database to see if it's actually been received. Now I'm using Mongo, as you probably know, from quokka-prime. So I'm going to go into Mongo. I say use quokka-db, that's what I called it. And now I can do show tables, and that shows me the tables that I have. And guess what? Down here you can see I have a brand new table called Snoops. And you know, I haven't done this for a while, but let me do db.snoops.find. I think if I do a find, it's going to show me everything. That's pretty good. So here is, it's filled up my screen with all of the packet captures. So here are, this is obviously hard to follow exactly what it is. Here's one packet capture. I know that that's my packet capture because I see another ID here. So this is another packet capture. Where's the ID? There it is. So just looking at this packet capture, I can ignore the object ID. I have a timestamp, so that's interesting. I have a local timestamp. My source is Quokka. I have a hex dump, so this is the hex version of it. I'm assuming that it goes down to somewhere around here. I have a source, which I can't even remember what that is. Oh, type ICMP, so it snooped an ICMP packet. Let's see, there's a bunch of information that came from my packet sniffing that I did. And yeah, so I've got a packet. So now, just to remind you at this point in time, what have we done? Let's look at this picture. We've implemented a certain amount of this. We can start snooping, and snooping will send a message to the quokka worker. The quokka worker will listen and will begin to do snooping, but we decided we're just reusing capture, but telling it, hey, this is really a snoop, because we want the information not to go into packet captures, which is more for display, but rather we want it to just go into this snoops table. And as we can see, it's now in the snoops table. So if I wanted to, I could write an application that would offline parse and consume all of this snoop information, snooped packet captures, and could look for things like passwords, usernames. It could identify HTTP requests, which might be vulnerable as opposed to encrypted traffic. It can do all kinds of things. I haven't written that yet. I'm not actually sure exactly how I want to do that, but we've made a good beginning. And this is how I generally would begin my implementation of a new feature. So the next thing I'd probably do is work on the user interface so that I don't have to use this. In order to initiate that packet capturing, I've got the data coming back and going into this snoops table, and I should be able to do some analysis so that when I do implement the user interface for real, it can actually do some type of, post-analysis summary of what it found for that particular target. Was it what protocols is it using? What are its open ports that might be vulnerable? What did we find in terms of usernames and passwords? Anyway, it's a good start for our Snoop feature. Oh, and yeah, the last thing that I probably want to do here is I want to do Control D to get out of here. I'm going to do a git status. And you can see I've made changes to Quokka server, Quokka APIs, and Quokka util. So I'm going to do a git commit -am, and this message is going to be Snoop worker and REST API fixes. So let's do that. Git push origin. Remember, I'm not on main, I'm on Snoop. So I'm going to say git push origin Snoop. It's going to go out to the great Git cloud in the sky, and it saves my new changes. And now if I do git status, I'm on branch Snoop, and my working tree is clean. Now my main branch is still the same. It doesn't have this Snoop functionality. I want to do more testing before I would merge it, even though this is only partially implemented feature. But yeah, this is how we implement a feature. Well, that's it. I hope it made some sense and gave you an idea about software development in the real world. A lot more than just writing little scripts that do one tiny thing, but more of understanding how software development actually works. As always, if you have questions, please, I beg you, let me know, and I will answer them to the best of my ability. In the meantime, congratulations if you made it this far. Thanks for listening.